Hey guys, hey brothers and sisters from the Starknet family. I hope you're doing great. Thanks a lot for tuning in for this special space about the Starknet Community Proposals that have been brought forward by David Garay from Nostra Finance on one end and from Jane from zkLend on the other. This is going to be a pre-space phase in the next 6 to 7 minutes where I'll be reading both proposals. I'll start with the proposal by David that was submitted about 10 days ago in the Starknet Community Forum. And then I'll continue with the proposal brought forward by Jane that was submitted yesterday. Okay, so just give me a couple of seconds and I start reading David's proposal. So, proposal, incentivizing the growth phase of Starknet. Building on Starknet, the Starknet DeFi ecosystem is in its very early stages. The total value locked, TVL, among DEXs is less than $1.5 million. At the time of writing, only 14 projects are live on Starknet mainnet and only 4 focus on DeFi. Incentive programs on Avalanche and Optimism. There are a number of layer 2 solutions live today that are competing to capture market share in order to become the dominant L2. Many layer 2s and layer 1s have successfully launched DeFi incentive programs to onboard new developers, increase user engagement, and increase TVL on-chain. Overall, these elements contribute to a healthy and growing ecosystem of activity. For example, Avalanche. In August 2021, the Avalanche Foundation announced a $180 million DeFi incentive program called Avalanche Rush, to try to onboard more dApps to their growing DeFi ecosystem. As a result, the TVL on Avalanche peaked at 12.2 billion within 4 months. Optimism. 5.4% of the total initial token supply has been kept aside to be distributed among various applications built on Optimism via the Optimism Governance Fund. This fund has been distributed across different phases, starting with phase 0 in July 2022, where 25 proposals were submitted, with 24 of them receiving OP tokens. This resulted in a relatively steady growth in TVL, which remained high throughout these months. The incentive programs of the 2 chains mentioned above have been successful in terms of onboarding new developers and new users to their respective ecosystems. It's worth noting that the fall in TVL for these blockchains was at least partially due to the general market conditions. Additionally, the transaction count and the daily active users on Avalanche is still higher than before Avalanche Rush. Proposal, Starknet Governance Fund. There are already several proposals in place to incentivize builders on Starknet. However, the Starknet community must know about the next growth phase with incentives targeting users. To compete with existing L2s, we propose the Starknet Foundation to launch a Starknet Governance Fund, an incentive program targeted at the users of the Starknet ecosystem. We believe that Starknet has a lot of potential to become the #1 scaling solution for Ethereum. Setting up an incentive program will motivate talented builders to deploy and incentivize users to bridge across the Stark to Starknet and use the growing number of Starknet products. In addition to DeFi, we propose that the selection committee, discussed in more detail below, may also consider applications from adjacent areas such as GameFi and NFTs. What does the foundation need to do? Set aside a percentage of the total supply of Stark tokens as incentives. For example, Optimism set aside 5.4% of the total ops supply, divide the incentive program into multiple phases chapters. Then one optimal strategy could be to allocate around 50% of the entire incentive allocation for the next 2 years. Projects must apply for incentives by submitting a proposals on the Starknet Governance Forum. A separate governance proposal could be made at the end of the 2-year period to determine how the remaining 50% is distributed. The program could be extended for a further 5 years, for example. How would projects apply? A project applying for the incentive program should mention details about their projects, links to social media, TVL, presence on other chains, and the TVL on the respective chains. The proposals should also include an answer to the following questions. What has the project done so far to build a Starknet ecosystem, promote Cairo, and onboard users? What is the background of the team building the products? Do they have experience building products? Have any VCs funded them? Why do they want to apply for the incentive program? And how will it help them and facilitate the growth of Starknet? Is the product audited, or when is an audit scheduled? The requested amount of Stark tokens, which will be capped. How does the project plan to distribute these tokens? How long will it take to distribute the tokens? How will the incentives help build product market fit? How will they retain users once the reward distribution strategy is over? Projects should be able to apply for the incentive program more than once. Decisions will be made based on the above criteria and the success of the previous campaigns. Additionally, projects should have exhausted all tokens that they plan to distribute before applying again. Selection committee. A committee from within the Starknet Foundation should look after the entire incentive program and make unbiased and rational decisions on all applications. The committee's remit would include liaising with the projects applying for grants on any queries, the release of grants, marketing activities for announcements, following up with projects to understand their learnings from the token distribution plan, and ensuring that all grants are distributed within the set duration specified by the project at the time of applying. Suggested next steps, I would propose keeping this proposal open for discussion for a period of 2 weeks. Based on all the comments and suggestions made by the community members, the Starknet Foundation could formally announce and launch the program by the end of March 2023. Projects could submit applications from 1st of April 2023, and tokens could be allocated once regenesis takes place. So guys, this was the proposal made by Dave from Nostra. Just give me a couple of seconds to drink a sip of water, and I'll be back to read the other proposal. So let's start reading the proposal submitted by Jane from zkLend, which got the title Growth and Marketing Alignment on Starknet. So introduction. Over the past year, much attention has been given to growing the Starknet developer ecosystem, optimizing network performance, and establishing governance. While these efforts are essential for building a strong foundation, we need to focus on expanding the Starknet community beyond developers to drive real-world adoption. Recently, the community has seen governance proposals pertaining to wider Starknet user adoption, such as this recent proposal by David from Nostra on the creation of a Starknet governance fund. We strongly believe this is a step in the right direction and in the spirit of further discussion. And we want to propose the creation of a growth committee within the Starknet Foundation. As a team building on Starknet, we believe that a more defined onboarding strategy for users would benefit the ecosystem and amplify marketing efforts from individual projects. The proposed growth committee builds on Nostra's recent proposal for a Starknet governance fund that focuses on wider Starknet user adoption. We believe that the creation of a growth committee is a logical next step to help coordinate and accelerate user onboarding efforts while providing guidance, governance, and monitoring of the usage of the funds. Current state of growth on Starknet. Currently, Starknet growth is loosely divided into 3 parts: developer onboarding, partnership building, and consumer growth. Developer onboarding is a joint effort by the Starknet team and developer communities, such as Only Dust and Encode Club, to onboard developers through a mix of in-person and online educational events. Partnership building is also an effort led by Starknet team to secure key infrastructure and institutional partnerships, such as the Chainlink Scale Program, Consensus, Alchemy, and Ledger. However, consumer growth is missing. A dedicated growth committee is needed to drive user adoption. Growth committee mandate. The Growth Committee mandate is to coordinate consumer-focused activities aligned with Starknet and Ethereum's principles and to accelerate user onboarding onto Starknet's protocols. The Growth Committee will provide guidance, governance, and monitoring of the usage of the Starknet Governance Fund. Scope. The scope of the Growth Committee and grants the committee approves should encompass one or more of the areas below. General marketing, efforts to create general awareness about Starknet and its protocols. This could include social media campaigns, influencer outreach, targeted advertising, and other strategies to raise the profile of the network and attract more users. User incentives, campaigns for users to participate in Starknet's protocols. This could include rewards and transaction fee rebates for completing certain actions or achieving specific milestones on the network, such as using a protocol, providing liquidity, or participating in governance decisions. Then, point 3, user education. Support educational initiatives focused on Starknet and its protocols. This could include workshops, webinars, tutorials, and other resources designed to help users understand how to use the network effectively. By providing education, the committee aims to lower the barrier to entry for new users and increase overall adoption of the network. It is important to note that while user incentives will be within the Growth Committee's scope, it shall only be a part and not the whole of what the Growth Committee focuses on. We have seen several successful campaigns by other networks that use creative means beyond incentives in order to drive user adoption. Some examples include Arbitrum Odyssey, an 8-week program introduced by Arbitrum last summer aimed at increasing user engagement by offering NFT rewards, where users can interact with various protocols each week, complete specific on-chain actions, and earn badges. zkSync account abstraction of food truck experience, a partnership between zkSync and WeLook and my Ether wallet that allow users to test out zkSync Era, previously zkSync 2.0, and transact on the network at ETH Denver. Optimism quests. Periodic quests or challenges that are designed to incentivize community members to contribute to the Optimism ecosystem. The quests can range from bug bounties to create challenges, and rewards can include anything from Optimism tokens to exclusive swag. The committee should, where appropriate, also help with such coordination. The committee's scope should be broad and not limited to specific industries or objects to ensure the widest possible adoption of Starknet. Assessment criteria. Each interested party or protocol should submit a written proposal detailing the goal of the campaign, execution plan, as well as resources required. While we will not go into detail on the application structure here, our friends at Nostra have done a great job in their proposal, and we suggest using it as a template once the Growth Committee is established. Individuals or projects teams should also disclose upfront the grants they have received from Starknet and or the Starknet Foundation to prevent double funding and similar types of activities, and to ensure that previous grants have been used up prior. Okay, then guys, I'll skip a bit the metrics for the success, or I just mentioned the important points. So metrics for success: wallets, new and existing, number of new and active wallets on Starknet, as well as the number of existing users who are engaging more with the platform. This metric is important as it indicates the growth of the user base. Then there is the point 2, average transaction size and frequency. average value transferred in a single transaction, while average transactions frequency tracks how often users are transacting on Starknet. These metrics provide insight into user behavior for optimizing UX and incentives. Point 3, total value locked in DeFi, incremental value of assets locked in Starknet contracts, and compare these against cost of liquidation of acquisition. And last point, new projects, a lagging indicator of ecosystem health, but arguably one of the most impactful in the long term. This can be tracked through GitHub plus on-chain activity. So we just skip towards conclusion and next steps. In conclusion, we propose the creation of a growth committee within the Starknet Foundation to review, approve, and help coordinate user-focused campaigns to drive user adoptions on Starknet. The growth committee would exist orthogonal to other committees in order to reduce redundancy in resources and responsibilities, and would solely be focused on consumer-facing activities. We recommended funds to be seeded from either the strategic reserve or community rebates pot within the Starknet Foundation tokens. This proposal is intended to further discussion and dig deeper into the long-term direction and governance model of the proposed Starknet Growth Fund, renamed from Starknet Governance Fund, by us and David. While it is not an exhaustive checklist, we believe this proposal is a crucial step towards making Starknet a more inclusive community with users. We encourage the community to share their thoughts and feedback on these proposals in the comments below. Okay, so guys, maybe it took a bit longer than I thought. So we have 5 minutes delay. So I would start calling the guests here. Let me see if they're ready to speak. Yeah. So hey, David and Jane, how are you? Thanks for coming.
Hello, hello.
Hi.
Hey, David. Hey, Nostra.
Hey, Jane. So guys, as I was reading, I read both of your proposals. In this space, I would like to further explore them and have your view and impressions on them. I would go straight to David, and I would like to ask him if he could tell us more about about your proposal for a liquidity program for the Starknet ecosystem. I'd like to know which are the use cases and the examples from the crypto space that were mentioned in the paper, and how we should create our own Starknet variant of such liquidity incentive programs, by taking the pros and leaving out the cons of such programs and that were experienced in the history of DeFi and crypto in general, like liquidity mining, big farmers and all these issues. So just let us know what your proposal is about. If you could break it down in some points, please.
Sure. Yeah, I will start. Happy Friday, everybody. Yeah, it's great to have everybody here. Thanks for tuning in. I know it's a Friday. Everybody wants to go home and rest, but or maybe you are resting. But it's good to close the week with some proper governance discussion. So maybe before I get into it, and thanks for reading the proposal. I think maybe just a quick background about myself. So I've been in crypto since 2019. Started Tempus, basically our parent protocol for Nostra in 2021, and then we have been in the crypto space for quite a while. So Nostra is just one of the protocols that we're building, and I've been involved with various DeFi protocols since the beginning. So, for example, I'm on the balancer multisig. I have contributed to, you received a bunch of grants from Lido, Balancer, a bunch of other protocols when we were building Tempus. So we had been around the ecosystem for quite a while, and then joined the Starknet ecosystem a little bit later on than some of the earlier protocols that had been building here for quite a while. So Maybe like one quick word about what we're trying to do here at Nostra. I mean, we're building a money market, and also with the money market, we're doing a native stablecoin that will integrate directly with the money market and the swap product that goes with it. So just creating like a liquidity layer sort of product. And this is what we've been working on for almost a year now. So yeah, so about the proposal itself. So basically the thinking behind it in the first place was that we have to create, we have to sort of start a discussion around how basically Starknet the foundation should start allocating these tokens that are allocated to it, and then just start basically a discussion about how these rewards should be allocated to incentivize early users and to create sticky liquidity in the context of DeFi specifically. We basically mentioned that there are a bunch of already existing incentivization programs, and two examples that we brought up were Avalanche and Optimism. They have had pretty significant success with their with both of the programs that they launched, and then as a result of that, and perhaps also as a result of the bull market that was going on at the time, both Avalanche and Optimism managed to increase the TVL significantly, which is, in the context of DeFi at least, that seems to be the metric that people go by, especially when it comes to money markets and AMMs and swap products. Yeah, and then that was one of the things that we kind of pointed out, and I pointed out. And in addition to that, we looked at a bunch of other things, like how it increased the number of daily transactions on chain, how it increased the token price, and also how in general that sort of tied in with all the other growth metrics that we mentioned that you already read. So I'm not going to go into too much detail on that. But basically, the purpose of this program should be that we should get more people to start using DeFi on Starknet. And we can say that there's been a bunch of other proposals floating around, for example, subsidizing gas fees and everything else in terms of increasing this liquidity, increasing usage. But the issue with that was that
welcome to Starknet.
It is, all different protocols have a very different operating mechanism, right? So some protocols use more gas, they are more gas intensive. For example, the swap product will always be using more gas than a native money market, right? So the money market doesn't require that many actions, and for example, a game on Starknet would be using a bunch of different gas compared to a money market, for example. So it's really hard to say. It's really hard to find a suitable metric, and this was kind of like the basic idea behind starting this discussion, just to try to get the juices flowing and try to get more ideas out there and take what is good from the Optimism and Avalanche programs and try to mitigate the problems that they have and try to overcome them. And in fact, we received a bunch of different suggestions already that we liked. For example, from the Masari governor team, we received sort of a counter proposal where they said we should, instead of focusing solely on TVL, we should focus on daily active users, new users, number of transactions, fees, and then ultimately what is the most important thing is we have to look at how many users were retained once the incentivization period is over. And in fact, we've seen this problem with a bunch of different protocols, right? So especially, it's really hard to look at the data, and I actually realized that in the proposal itself, because the drop in the TVL and Optimism and Avalanche actually corresponded with the end of the bull market. So yeah, so there were a bunch of different things here. I think like in the context of DeFi, looking at TVL would make sense, but for NFT projects or other types of gaming projects,
welcome to Starknet.
Look at other sorts of other forms of incentivization. ultimately, I think like we need a lot more participation from people who are building on Starknet, and actually this is why I'm actually happy that you guys, Jane, you're also involved with the discussion, and I think like this is kind of like a step in the right direction. And in fact, it's very early days. I do realize that in the proposal that I made, we had we set a very optimistic timeline. So we had like, well, we're going to open this discussion for 2 weeks and then see where it goes. And in fact, I think we received more than 20 posts on the proposal that we made. But I think ultimately it's going to require a lot more time to get to a point where everybody's happy and it can be put to a vote and we can finally decide what to do. I think, yeah, so I think like in terms of the criteria, that's probably the most difficult thing to get right. So maybe it's worth mentioning a couple of words about that. But I think like what is the most important and the most difficult part, and what will be the most difficult part of this, is to allocate the tokens fairly between different projects and to look at the requirements of each project and to try to compare them to each other and have a very careful thinking about like what projects needs how many tokens, because the requirements for a money market versus the requirements for a GameFi product will be totally different. So it's really hard to judge the merits of those projects and compare them on like a project to project basis. So I think some of the questions that came up, and maybe this is something that is probably worth mentioning here, since you already know the rest of the proposal, is that some of the questions that we've been looking at are for the selection criteria for who should get these rewards is actually kind of complicated, and it should be a very, very careful vetting of projects and builders. In terms of the questions themselves, I think we raised stuff like what has the project done so far to build in the ecosystem and onboard the users? What is the background of the team? Do they have existing funding? And to what extent should that existing funding affect the number of tokens that they get? Are there any sort of conflicts with between the actual selection committee and the tokens and the project to which they award the tokens? And in terms of security, it also depends on the nature of the project. For DeFi, it's way more important, but is the product audited? When is the audit scheduled? And then ultimately, I think it should be up to the project to request an amount of Stark tokens, and they should be able to justify that through some sort of objective criteria, and then actually follow up on that. I understand because of the nature of crypto, the optimism delegates, for example, they have raised a bunch of concerns about giving tokens to anonymous teams, for example, and that can come with an additional layer of responsibility because you don't know who you're giving the tokens to, but because of the nature of the crypto world, you pretty much cannot avoid that. So that will be one thing that the committee will need to look at. Probably the most important thing is that how will the incentives help build product market fit for the project? And this is obviously an extremely difficult question. And I think like there is like a very important selection criteria for the people who will be on this committee to have built projects that have actually gotten product market fit, so they can actually judge whether the project that they award these tokens to will have a chance of getting there. So it's like it is a very careful design, and actually I would like to thank everybody for contributing so far. And yeah, let's keep the discussion going.
Cool. Thank you, David, for clarifying, for giving us clarifications over the incentivizing growth phase of Starknet's proposal made by you from the Nostra finance team. And thanks a lot again also for kicking off awareness around this crucial topic, which is user growth strategies. Because obviously my own view is that we still need to improve a bit on the growth, marketing, and promotional side as a community. Also, Starkware is doing an amazing job in terms of business development and marketing. No questions about that. But obviously, as a community, we should come together and also create our own strategy about that. And having said that, I would like to turn to Jane, and I would like to ask them, how and why the Growth Committee proposal was born. And please break it down in some brief points, and then you could also add some views on the David's proposal. How did it inspire you? All this stuff.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Nostra. So hi, everyone. I'm Jane, and I am one of the co-founders of zkLend alongside my colleagues, Brian and Jonathan. And we are also building a money market protocol on Starknet. And the focus of our protocol, our project is really two sides. One is Artemis, which is the DeFi side of things. People would be able to permissionlessly borrow and lend. But on the other hand, we also have an institutional solution that is coming later down the line. And our institutional solution is really looking to target institutional borrowers and being able to open the pool up to lenders who could be retail as well as institutional users. Now, with that said, I know that this proposal isn't just about us. So I'll tell you a little bit more about, myself and kind of how this proposal came about. A little bit of background about me. I'm a latecomer in crypto. I only joined the space professionally in 2020, late 2020, in fact. I met Brian and Jonathan, and by then John was already pretty knee deep into the Starknet ecosystem, however large it was. And he was, learning Cairo and really just picking things up. And it was still a pretty scrappy ecosystem then. And, I think there was a saying that it was like L2 2022. And we all kind of thought that, come summer of 2022, Starknet's going to pick up and, there's going to be like an L2 war across the board. Now, I think that is indeed the case for Optimism and Arbitrum, but through no fault of anyone's, but I think zk development has lagged behind just given the complexity of the technology that is involved. But as a project team, we also have to think about kind of our marketing strategies, our launch plans, and how we plan to acquire users over 2023. So, when the time came, when the team and I started discussing our mainnet plans and the wider ramp up, we did come into this issue where we realized that not everything is optimized on Starknet yet. And, when that time comes, how do we actually want to approach marketing? Like, is it too early to start marketing zkLend to the mass right now when Starknet isn't even fully in production yet? And what kinds of marketing activities are they planning in parallel to help us kind of amplify our marketing dollars? Honestly, it's as simple as that, right? Like if we're going to put in, let's just say 50K into marketing zkLend, the fundamental question is, do people even know about Starknet? And do they know how to use the wallets? Do they know how to bridge assets? And are there other use cases on Starknet for them besides depositing and lending and maybe trading on a couple of AMMs? And I think as David rightly pointed out, there are a few protocols live on mainnet right now, and there's not a whole lot of liquidity. So for us, the way I think about it is, now that the network is coming closer into production, are there kind of growth and marketing activities aligned so that when this happens, we can basically project or, turbocharge Starknet's growth? And I think, frankly, the answer is I don't quite see a clear path just yet, which is how this proposal came about. Louis and Henry have been really, really active on the developer onboarding ecosystem. I know Henry's done a bunch of tutorials. The Only DOS and Encode team, they've done like hackathons and educational events. And I think that focus is really great. And like, let's not stop there. I'm also cognizant that other people like OHOD and team, we've been introduced to other infrastructure projects just to gauge kind of their interest of coming onto Starknet, as well as kind of understand their timeline. And I think the partnership bit is being worked on by the Starkware team. But the last bit, which I don't see, is consumer growth and a clear kind of market marketing strategy towards that, which is why, this is why this growth proposal came about. I won't repeat everything that is in the proposal because I think David's covered the user incentives part. But the reason why I proposed something of this sort in conjunction with David's is because I think user incentives is indeed only one part of our growth strategy. There should be more that is done in terms of user onboarding. So, for example, when I like started using Web3 protocols, right? I used Finematics. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Finematics, but I watched a lot of Finematics video. I use the Bankless Academy website a lot to kind of understand, okay, how do I like create a MetaMask wallet? How do I bridge funds and things like that? And, my background is in Web 2, so I'm quite familiar with kind of Web 2 marketing strategies. And not to say that everything in Web 2 works in Web 3, because why else would we be in this space unless we want to reinvent? But at the same time, I do think that there are learnings there that the Starknet Foundation should pay a little bit of attention to. And this includes things like education. So as I mentioned, there's Polygon University and Bankless Academy that have done a great job to make Web3 relatable, not just for existing, yield farmers and other people on the network, but for rookies like myself a couple of years ago on, what it's like to actually deposit funds into the network. And the other part is just in terms of general marketing, which I find lacking. In terms of like business outreach, making sure that we work with the relevant influencers, whether it's through targeted advertising or other strategies. I just want to help raise the profile of the network as much as possible. And I guess one last thing to add on the user incentives bit, which I think David's gone into a whole lot of detail there, so I won't repeat myself. I won't repeat what he said, but I think the key difference here that I see between incentivizing different protocols to run user incentives is, I really do see the value in coordinated activity. And what I mean by that is it's not just user incentives that we distribute on a protocol level, but how do we work together, right? Like, for example, us and Nostra, right? Or us and Bravos, or us and Argent, and us in the different bridges, right? How do we make the experience an integrated one so that people feel that they're coming onto Starknet and they're completing a series of quests and really exploring what the network has to offer rather than focusing on individual protocols? And so, this is really the goal of the proposal. It isn't necessarily to go into every single piece of detail being like, hey, this is exactly how it's going to be executed at the stage, because I do think it's a little bit early for that. But ultimately, I want everyone to agree on the direction and what is lacking right now within the ecosystem so that we can get this conversation going. Yeah, so that's my spiel. And yeah, I'll pause right here.
Okay, thanks a lot, Jane. And it's been a wonderful overview on your proposal. And I think that, zkLend, you guys at zkLend has been the pioneers on Starknet when it comes to, to educational material and campaigns. You've been doing a great job with, podcasts, articles, and you tried your best you've been trying your best to educate people about crypto in general, about the tech, and about Starknet. So that's, thanks a lot for what you've been doing on that field. And however, right now, I would like to go towards the final part of this space about about Starknet Community Proposals. And I'd like to know from each of you how these two proposals relate to each other. How can we combine them, and and then I would also like to know what are the main challenges and objections that have been made to these proposals so far on the forum. I saw, the main objection was about, the topic of liquidity mining, malicious liquidity mining. Do you think eradicating liquidity mining, malicious liquidity mining is possible, or it's just an utopia? I'd like to know about that. And then, then you can both exchange your points on that. And David, you can start with it.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Yeah, maybe just a super quick thing about liquidity mining. Like, people think of liquidity mining as this like evil thing that people do, but you just have to remember that Compound would be nowhere today without liquidity mining. Like, liquidity mining was kicked off. Robert Leshner invented it, right? And then they started it off. And then basically what happened is that it just spiraled out of control because of overfunding, right? So products were basically, there's a lot of money flowing into crypto. There's a lot of projects being overfunded with tens and tens and tens of millions of dollars that they don't need. And ultimately what happens here is that the VC money ends up trickling down to retail over time as a sort of marketing expense, right? And I think like it is obviously just one of the things that crypto projects tend to do all the time, right? But we have to kind of explore and think a little bit more about why they're doing it. And ultimately, it is a marketing cost, right? So you give people tokens away, and then you will see what sticks, right? And this has been the approach for the longest period of time. And unfortunately, we've come to a point where if you have no incentives, and I'm talking, for example, here in the context of a money market, not talking about like GameFi and stuff. In the context of a money market, if you don't have some sort of incentives to kick it off straight away, it's going to be really difficult to create solutions that are competitive with TradFi, which is ultimately what we want to do here, right? So, and I can go into why that is, but I think like it became even more clear today that because the interest rates in TradFi are so high and the DeFi yields are so low, that we kind of have to prop it up somehow. And if we have sort of this tool at our disposal to do it at least to some extent, and we have the tokens to do it, then it makes sense to at least get something out there and then try to come up with a way in which it cannot be gamed, and then just go and do it. And I think like that's that's one view that a lot of people are not willing to take publicly, at least. But I think like, and in fact nobody is, but I think like we just have to realize that otherwise it's just very difficult to make our solutions competitive with traditional finance, and especially in the current high interest rate environment. So that's something that we kind of have to just sort of get comfortable with. And I'm not talking about Starknet tokens here. I'm talking about native tokens in addition, right? So maybe whether or not that is going to happen, it doesn't really matter, because we sort of have to just do it to some extent, right? So that's my thinking. And about your second question about the differences between the proposals, I think we're very much aligned here. I think we don't have a lot of friction points. I think Jane's proposal was more focused on how are we going to do this, and our proposal was more about like what are we going to do. But it would be good to I think in the next couple of weeks have a more concrete idea about like how are we going to do the other parts. So the incentives part is kind of clear. I think like people sort of get it, and we can start to put that into a box and try to figure out like how exactly that's going to look like, and to have a more concrete idea that people can, and the foundation can decide on, and then bring an actually working proposal to them that's going to be a very concrete one, right, with addressing all the problems that people have raised. So that's fair enough, right? But the other two parts, I think, we would like to get some more clarity on, especially the marketing part, about how that would work. Especially, I know like a lot of different projects have experimented with something like sub-DAOs, where a marketing function was sort of given to a DAO, right, a specific committee that was set up. But the main problem with that was that it's a decentralized thing. So it's like it's hard to engage on a daily basis with traditional marketing activities if you only have tokens at your disposal, and you have committee meetings, and you can sit in the high white tower and then come up with ideas. But at the end of the day, I mean, based on my experience, not much is going to happen. So I think like if we are going to go with something like that, like this mixed approach that Jane suggested, I think we have to just have a very clear thinking about it, and think about it on a practical level, because that's probably the biggest challenge. So I think like that's everything from me. Thanks guys.
Thanks a lot. Please, Jane, follow up.
Yeah. So I think there are 3 points I want to make here. First is just in terms of alignment of maybe I'll start with the second question. First is just in terms of the alignment of the proposals. I think this proposal is slightly different than a community proposal in that we are asking the foundation to carve out a bunch of tokens for this growth committee. And, while the ecosystem can chime in all we want, ultimately it is the decision of the foundation on whether or not they want to set up this committee. So I think the goal of 2 proposals here, or along the same lines of what we're asking for, is really just to raise as many eyeballs as possible and get the attention of the foundation. So that's the first thing I want to clarify. And in terms of my second point, which is on kind of liquidity mining and how I view that, I would tend to agree that if you ask, if I read through the comments, right, especially through some developers' lens, it's not a sustainable way to acquire users. And look, I completely get that, right? Because you're worried that users are going to come in, try to farm a bunch of tokens and then leave. But ultimately, that is how you kickstart a community. But I do think that because the growth committee is going to take a more integrated approach that isn't solely focused on incentives, we could tweak the balance of how we allocate these funds over time, right? So at the beginning, more of this could be allocated towards things like airdrops, bridging incentives, or whatever ideas the community has. But eventually, we know that once a protocol picks up and they've given out their incentives and they've been established as a strong protocol, perhaps these incentives aren't as important. So longer term investments such as education, Starknet University, for example. I was just clicking into the Starknet website and there are a ton of resources, but they're mostly developer hub, developer documentation. So for us to come up with something like this, I think would be a huge value add. Now, whether or not it's going to be implemented by the growth fund or by the governance committee themselves, the growth governance committee themselves, that's another question that I think is up for debate. I think, as David mentioned, perhaps a DAO isn't the best way to execute some of these activities. But once we have a certain portion of tokens carved out, that's not to say that we can't go hire a team that's fully dedicated on consumer marketing. So I guess what I'm trying to say here is I don't think it needs to be done on a project level, but rather there just needs to be a fund carved out for the purposes of these activities. And right now, I just don't necessarily see that team within Starkware doing that, just given that they are handling multiple products at the same time. So for example, they're doing marketing for StarkX and they're doing marketing for Starknet. So in the long term, how do we make sure that incentives are aligned so that we have a solid group dedicated to these activities is kind of intention of what I mean. And I actually don't remember. I don't remember my third point, but I'll pause right here.
Okay, thanks, guys. Both of you expressed very interesting views, and I really liked David's one. On the fact that liquidity mining itself is not a malicious thing. And in the end, as you said, maybe if there wasn't for liquidity mining, there would be no DeFi, right? Because DeFi season was started by Compound, so maybe DeFi season would have never happened without the first liquidity mining program on DeFi. And therefore I really like that point. And then obviously I love the point that Jane made, and also the suggestion about the Starknet University idea. And obviously as fundamental driven personality in the ecosystem, I really care about educating people, with easy words, and trying to attract people who don't know anything about blockchain, and letting them understand the potential of this technology in order to help them achieving what they want, and in order to improve their lives, basically. And so I really think that we should really focus on educating users and help them navigating the journey through crypto and Starknet. And so, guys, I think we've come to the end of the episode. First of all, I would like to shout out to both the zkLend and the Nostra teams for what they've been doing both at the protocol and tech level and also at the educational and marketing level. I'm really impressed by what you're doing, and you're really something very precious for the community. And then obviously I would like to thank the audience for being here, and thanks a lot. I saw there are a lot of OGs here. There are all the guys from both teams, and there's also Crypto Gurka. Shout out there, and yeah, so a big thanks to all the listeners, and finally also a big thanks to David and Jane. Thanks a lot for coming today and discuss your proposals. And then for the interest of the audience, I'm gonna create a Twitter post, where I will post the link to this Twitter space together with the links to both proposals, okay? So that you can reach to them in an easier way. Having said that, thanks a lot once again to David, Jane, and all the listeners. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, guys.
Thanks, guys. Have a nice weekend. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye, guys. Have a nice weekend. Bye.